constitute good research?
What constitutes what research?
Good research.
Oh, good research.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy enough to talk about that. So for me, good research is research that pushes forward our knowledge and advances things in some way.
Yeah.
And that's generally what a journal is looking for. They're looking for insight, a new method, a new way of thinking, a new concept. Basically, something that advances, builds upon and advances what we already know. So anything that just tells us something that we already know is going to find it very difficult to get published. I mean, that's the basic bottom line.
Yeah.
I do have a slide that kind of explains this in a way, so I can probably start there. So can you see these slides?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see this slide. Okay, so this is my attempt to explain what gets published in what kind of journal.
Yeah.
And so the easiest way to do it is to use an example. So I'm going to use an example of a study of airport security. Now, if you want to read the whole thing, then the link at the top will take you to a post that explains the whole thing. But I'll just run through it. So if I was to go and look at Hong Kong Airport or any airport, Dublin Airport, and I was to go and do a study of it, and then I was to write something that was quite descriptive, it's quite empirical. So something that's empiricist is the idea that the data speaks for itself. So if I just tell you a story about the airport, I get that into a national level journal, but I find it quite difficult to get it into any other kind of journal because it's not offering anything new. All it's doing is offering description. So there's no new real insight there. And the only people who are really going to be interested in it are probably people who are interested in that airport. And it's very unlikely to get cited. Now, what I could do, I could take an existing theory. So I could take something like Michel Foucault's disciplining theory, governmentality, and I could apply it to the airport. So I say, I've got this theory, I'm going to apply it to the airport, so I'm going to use an established theory. So I'm not creating new theory, I'm using existing theory to understand the airport. And I might get an international journal that's quite basic, a quite low-ranking journal. And it will probably have quite low impact. And the reason why is it's offering some new insight, but it's not offering a lot. It's an application of existing theory onto a topic that's already well studied. I could, though, say, so this is onto the third one now, extends or reworks a theory. I could actually say that Foucault's theory doesn't work fully. And the reason why it doesn't work fully is because he was writing in the 1970s and early 1980s. And since then, airports have changed quite dramatically. They're now full of software, they're full of automated management, they're full of algorithmic governance. There's all other kinds of things going on there. And his theory doesn't quite work. Now, I can get it to work if I tweak it or rework it or extend it or do something to him. So now I'm starting to become a bit more useful because I'm not just giving a little bit of new insight, I'm starting to create new tools, new ways of thinking. And I'm putting that into a good quality journal, and it might have some medium impact. Because lots of people interested in airports will be interested in that, and some people interested in governance will be interested in that, and so they might find that useful. The last level, though, flips things on its head. So rather than using governance theory to think about the airport, what I'm going to do is use the airport to rethink governance. So I've flipped it around. It's not governance to think about the airport, it's the airport to rethink governance. And I'm going to say, Foucault's theory doesn't work, and I need a new theory. So I'm going to invent a new way of thinking. Okay? Now that becomes really high impact and really useful, because you could take that theory and you could apply it to schools, you could apply it to hospitals, you could apply it to universities, you could apply it to government departments, you can apply it to anything where governance operates. And that's really useful. It's a completely new way of thinking. Okay, so basically what editors are looking for, and it's the same for what PhD supervisors or examiners are looking for, is to go across this diagram from left to right. And now doing this is not necessarily easy, right? So on the right hand side, the high impact, that's really, really difficult. And some people, if you write 1 or 2 articles in that space in your career, you've done really well. The people who are really big names in disciplines work on that side of the diagram quite consistently. So in geography, in my discipline, somebody like David Harvey or Dorian Massey or Nigel Frift or somebody would be working on that side, and that's why they're a big name, is they're producing knowledge that's useful across a lot of domains. Most people are working in the middle, and most of what editors are trying to do is move people from the low impact to medium impact. They're trying to move people from a level 2 to a level 3 paper. Lots of people submit level 2s thinking that they're level 3s, and what the refereeing process does is try to move them towards the level 3. Anybody who's in level 1 or level 2 is going to find it quite difficult to get their work published, and they'll find it very difficult to get it published in the top journals, and that's the reason why. So I don't know, does that help?
Yeah, it really helped. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think the key thing is you have to. I'm always saying to my students and some of my doctoral researchers, what is the hook? What's the hook of your paper? What's the new idea? What's the new tool? What's the new method? What's the new theory? What's the new idea? What's the new insight? What is new? What's the hook that will mean that people will want to read your paper?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that's the key thing I think you need to find. If it's a very descriptive account, then you'll find it quite difficult to get published.
Okay.
In the top journals.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Rob.
Anybody else?
Hi, Professor Rob. I have a question.
Yep. Hi.
Hi, and I want to ask that how do you understand a good research thesis? What kind of research thesis that you think is good, and is there anything you need to pay attention when deciding the thesis?
Yeah, so actually similar kinds of advice to the journal thing, really. When I'm examining PhDs, I think, and when most people are examining PhDs, they're looking for work that is in this level 2, level 3, this use of theory and extends and reworks theory. So a kind of a solid, okay thesis is this use of theory, and a really good PhD is this extends or reworks. If you were to do a theory in this last one, the high impact, it would be exceptional, and it would be really, really rare. Very, very few people at PhD level operates in that space. Most people are operating in this space. If you were down, I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor, but if you were down in the empiricist area, that would be quite a weak thesis, and it might struggle in the examination. So I think the same kind of thing when you're thinking about a thesis topic, or you're thinking about what you want to research, you need to be trying to find a question that, if you answer it, will solve a problem. And the problem might be a way of thinking about something, or the problem might be a practical solution, or a policy solution, or some kind of intervention. But the thesis has got to lead to something more than insight. Okay, so it's trying to find. It's the same thing about finding a hook. It's about finding the question. And then when you write the paper or you write the thesis, then you're trying to convert the question into a hook. So it's really about trying to find a compelling question. And a really good question is one that we don't already know the answer to. So sometimes I will do some thesis, look at some thesis proposals, and the question is basically something that we kind of intuitively already know the answer to, or there's already an established literature that gives us an answer. So then the question is, well, why are you asking that question? Why aren't you trying to find a new angle? Does that help?
Yeah, it's help. Thanks.
Yeah. I think the key thing often is just to see it depends on what your kind of area of research is, but there's lots of things going on in the world, obviously at the minute and all the time, and it's trying to find something that maybe is quite current, or that people are kind of interested in, so often around things that are changing or things that seem to be in transition. They often are good places to start looking for questions, because there's obviously something happening.
Thanks.
Anyone else? I kind of think the other thing is just to remember that there are lots of different ways of publishing your work.
To make it more interesting to the other one. But how can we make it more interesting to the other one, to let the readers like to read your article?
Well, I think again comes back to the idea of the hook.
Yeah.
So the hook is basically what grabs the reader and what then pulls them through the story. Mm-hmm. So the key thing to realize is you're always telling a story.
Yeah.
So non-fiction is the same as fiction in the same way. You're telling a factual story rather than a fiction story. So what you're trying to do is create a narrative that will capture people's imagination and interest and make them want to read from the start to the end. And what you want is a structure that will lead people through that. So structure is really important in storytelling, the kind of the narrative form that it takes, because it is the means by which you get people through. There's a very standard format in academia, if you want it, which is, a kind of an introduction, literature review, your method, your findings, your discussion, your conclusions, But you can make it more imaginative than that if you want, and you don't have to follow that structure. But it is key that each sentence logically follows each sentence, each paragraph logically follows each paragraph, and each section logically follows each section. If somebody is finding it difficult to read your story because they're not getting the information in the order that they need it, then you'll lose them as a reader. They'll just lose interest and they'll leave the story. So you need to give it to them in the order. If your story has a lot of signposting, so by signposting, it says things like see section 3, or as I said above, or as I discuss in the findings section, so if there's any of that signposting, then there's a problem with your structure. people should get what they need in the order that they need it. They shouldn't have to jump up and down your manuscript to get the information. So if you have a lot of signposting, then there's a problem with your structure. But the key thing is to have a narrative that runs through it, that draws the person through, and they can see very clearly what the argument is. And there's enough of a hook that they want to find out the next thing, and then find out the next thing, and then find out the next thing. So that's the key. That's the key thing, really. And you need to be able to tell people right at the very start why they should be reading it and what they're going to get from reading it. If they're on page 10 before they really find out what it is that you're going to do or what it is that they're going to learn, then that's way too late. You've already lost them. You have to tell them right near the beginning. And that's really key in non-academic work. Like if you're writing for a newspaper, the very first paragraph has to tell people what it is that they need to know. It can't wait to the last paragraph. It has to be the very first paragraph. Because most people, when they read a newspaper article, don't get to the end of the article. They read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs and then they stop. They don't read all the way to the end. So if you haven't told them immediately, then you'll know you won't tell most of the readers.
Okay, thanks. That's wrong.
Okay. I can give some more, just a more general advice around. Use this as a slide just to illustrate that. Another key thing to think about, how you can use the same material in different ways, so that you can kind of leverage the material. So this is just an example about some work I did, I guess over 10 years ago now, about housing, and about how different forms of writing fed off of each other. So I didn't just write a journal article. I started with actually writing a fiction story, and the fiction story got me interested in housing and planning issues. And that made me writing blog posts about what was going on with housing in Ireland at that time. The blog post got picked up by the media, and that then led into me writing newspaper op-eds. It also led me into doing newspaper interviews and radio interviews and television interviews and so on. It led to a lot of email correspondence with journalists and with policymakers. And what we ended up doing was writing a policy paper. And the policy paper was called The Haunted Landscape. And it was about empty, vacant housing in Ireland when the property crash happened. And the media were very interested in that. And we had a bidding war on exclusive rights to break the story. And we ended up going with a TV documentary. And so then I had to write a television script to make the documentary. The work was also going off into teaching. So I was then doing PowerPoint slides, and I was talking about it at conferences and about workshops. Then the material started to go into teaching. So it started to go into the classroom. Same material is then being reworked into academic papers. And it's also being worked into grant applications to then go and do research. And also one of my colleagues started working with artists and started writing little notes that go next to photos and photo exhibitions and so on. And so it's just a way of illustrating how the same material got reworked into lots of different media. So it wasn't just a question of doing my research and then writing an academic paper. It was doing my research and then writing blog posts, writing op-eds, writing emails, writing policy papers, writing documentary scripts, writing PowerPoint slides, writing lecture notes, and also writing academic papers. So I'm a kind of a believer in leveraging off what you're doing, not just doing the, you put a lot of work into writing your thesis, a lot of work into doing your research. You're just writing academic papers, then you're normally just talking to one group of people, which is your peer group. So I think you should have a think about how you can use the same material to talk to different audiences, and then you'll get more kind of what we would call bang for your buck, which is basically you get more value out of the work without having to do a lot more work because you've already done the research. You get a lot more value by trying to talk to these different audiences. I would do the same thing around teaching as well. If I'm going to teach the course, then I'm going to write the textbook. I'm already doing all of the work and research in all of the lectures. I might as well repurpose them for something else.
Professor Rob, do you have some advice or some suggestions for the structure of the structure of a journal article, like what the percentage we need to write for an instruction for a literature review like that?
Well, I think you can be creative if you want to, but generally most journal articles have a kind of a fixed kind of structure. They will always start with an introduction, which sets out the problem, sets out the context and the framing, gives some idea of the how it relates to literature, what the key hook or idea is. It would then move on to, if it's an empirical study, it would then move on to say about what research took place. So it will then give some kind of methodology. It would say, it would say kind of what research you did, how you did it, who took part in it, what method you used, what form of analysis you took, and so on. It would then move into something around giving the findings of the research. So it would set out what you actually found. If it was doing it well, it would do that by also linking it back to the literature and back to the framing. There would then normally be a discussion section, which is the explicit link back to the framing and the literature, basically saying what you found that advances or it chimes with or it diverges from what you've kind of found previously. And then it would move into a conclusion. Lots of people make a mistake with the conclusion. Lots of people write the conclusion as a summary of the paper. A conclusion is not a summary. Conclusion is what does this all mean? So what does this research mean? What new questions raise? What new research needs to happen? What new thinking needs to take place? Needs to be generated. Whatever it is, there has to be a conclusion that says what the paper has contributed and what needs to happen next. Now, loads of people do that wrong. Loads of people kind of do the conclusion as a summary, and what they say is, in this paper, I did this, I found this, I did that, and then it ends. So that's the key thing. So the conclusion is really quite key because it's the takeaways. It's the why does this paper matter? Does that help?
Hi, Professor. There's another question from the participant. He asked if it's possible to, if we have more citations to attract more attention.
Is it possible to get more citations?
Yes, is it possible to have more citations in order to receive more attention from the people?
Well, citations come from people being interested in the work. I don't know if that means you include more citations in the manuscript, so there's more in the reference list, or whether you can get citations attached to the paper. I don't think it really matters who's in the reference list as long as the references make sense in relation to the content of the paper. The only thing that needs to be in the references or cited in the paper is what's relevant. I wouldn't pad it out with unnecessary references. just for the sake of having them there. At the same time, the only way you can get citations to your paper is for your paper to be good enough that people want to cite it. You can't give citations kind of yourself. So, and loads and loads of papers actually have very few citations, just a handful. The vast majority of 95% of papers will have less than 5 citations. I do think, though, that you can get attention to your paper in other ways. So a pretty typical way that people do it now, there's 2 main ways, I guess. The first is through presenting the work at conferences, workshop, and meeting people, and then sending them the paper afterwards or wherever it might be. So to use the kind of that kind of network, and if you're presenting it and it's a good presentation and it says something useful, then people will look for your work in the future. The second is through social media. It's by using things like Twitter and Facebook to say, I have a new paper published, you might be interested in it. So I actually find a lot of the papers I read through social media. So somebody will say on Twitter, I published a new paper, and if I'm interested in it, then I'll go and look at it and read it. So that's how I find a lot of my new work now. Sorry, there is a third way that you can get people more interested in your paper, and that's through discovery. So this is why keywords are really important, and selecting the right keywords, because people will search for keywords in Google Scholar and they'll search for it on other platforms. And so it's really important to have a title that's clear, and the title should have some of the keywords in it. And it's really important to have good keywords attached to the paper. And that will make the paper more discoverable by people doing searches. So those 3 things really. Present your work and network with people, use social media, and make sure the paper's discoverable.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that helps. It's always difficult at the beginning, I think, of your career to get your papers published and to get people interested in them. And as you go through your career, that kind of grows exponentially. So at the start, it's always very, very slow. And as you move along, then more and more people discover you and discover your work, and it kind of grows. It's a bit like a kind of a rolling a snowball or something. It's small for a long time and then slowly gets bigger. It gets bigger quite quickly.
By the way, I have another question, because I have heard your talk previously, and I'm interested that because a theory called the lender of the citizen participation mentioned that citizens have various roles. So how to use technologies to let the citizens enhance their civic engagement by increasing their awareness and keep up with the fast pace of the development of the society?
Oh God, that's a good question. Yeah, so getting citizens involved in either involved in the co-creation, or to keep them informed of what's actually going on in the city, or to get them involved in the process of helping develop the city is always difficult. And there's a very large literature and a long history of how that works. Now, obviously, in the technology age, technology can be used to mediate that, whether that's through social media or traditional media. There are some ways that you can do it. It might be through encouraging people to use particular apps. It might be by having kind of e-government websites or just forms of communication and so on. But even if you're communicating with people, it's still difficult to get them involved because, you know, people are busy, they have other lives. It's not their job to run or manage the city. It's the city government's job that. And so this has always been difficult to achieve. Now there are cities that are better at it. So Amsterdam is quite good at it. They also have a lot of staff though. So like the community development office in Amsterdam is a very large department. It has a lot of staff who's dedicated to go and talking to communities. Amsterdam has taken Barcelona has developed a platform called Decidium, which is a kind of an online platform that encourages people to share their ideas and their feedback about what's going on in the city. And they have tens of thousands of people, like, you know, literally tens of thousands of people writing comments, talking to each other, sharing their ideas, criticizing other people's ideas or the government's ideas, online voting about what they think should happen in their city, and so on. But importantly, they don't just do it online. They have it so that people that people can also go to town hall meetings, so people can go to physical meetings, and so they, you know, and they would run hundreds of those meetings. They wouldn't just hold one or two town hall meetings. They would run lots and lots of them in every neighbourhood, and so on. So for those people who don't have good tech literacy or good data literacy, or good digital skills or whatever, they can still go along to the traditional town hall meeting. They don't just do everything through the digital platform. So you have to be careful the digital platform doesn't exclude some groups. People have to, you know, have to have the technology and have to have the skills and the literacy to be able to participate. So there's a lot of work going on around that. There's a lot of these new kind of consultation decision apps, where citizens can comment on planning applications or on new developments or the way in which the city is run or whatever it might be. The other thing that Barcelona has done is it insists that all of those are open platforms, so they don't use proprietary software, so they're all free and open platforms. Okay,
thank you very much. That it really helps. And another participant asked, what's the best research methodology in construction management to get in high quality of publication?
Oh, I've no idea. I don't work in construction management. I'm a geographer, and I don't publish in those journals either. My view on methodology is basically you use whichever is most suitable to answer your question, which basically is a way of saying you should always start with the research question and find the best way to answer that question than to start with the methodology and work out what you can answer with it. So everything should start with a question. It should never start with the methodology. And the journal won't actually care what the methodology is as long as it answers the question. Or at least it shouldn't.
Thank you.
Is there another question there?
Does anyone have any questions? Oh, by the way, Professor, may I ask, what's the ratio of the each part? For example, introduction, maybe 10%, or conclusion, maybe 10%?
Yeah, I don't really think like that. I tend to think about, well, I would tend to just start with what's needed in each section rather than to say this is going to be 20%, this is going to be 20%, that's going to be 10%. I would normally, they normally find their own balance. At the same time, if 50% of your paper was methodology, then it's imbalanced. So there has to be some attempt at getting some evenness across the sections, but I never start with targets. So yeah, if things are becoming lopsided, so like if the introduction is 30% of the paper, then it's probably too long. Yeah, it's I don't know. Does that help? It's a kind of a bit of a vague answer. I think the easiest way of judging it is to have a look at articles that are already published in that journal, and they will give you a good idea about what the balance should be. They'll also give you a good idea about what kind of structure they're expecting.
Thank you. And Tony has another question to ask.
One
Yep.
more question.
Yep.
I know you are a professor in expert in the programming city or the urban management, but I would like to have another question. That what's your opinion of some disadvantage of this artificial intelligence in the city, like the problem of privacy and the other things? What's your opinion about this part? Thanks.
Sorry, I missed the end. What's my opinion about privacy?
About the privacy in the programming city, or like something like that. The AI, the artificial intelligence, like technology.
So as I kind of said in the talk earlier, my opinion is that we've been too focused on trying to look at those kinds of things like privacy, social sorting, control creep, anticipatory governance, all of those kind of ethical issues. I think we've been too focused on procedural solutions. We haven't been asking more normative questions. So what we've been doing is kind of saying, well, we're not kind of challenging how things should be. What we're doing is saying, in the way that society is at the minute, how do we relate? Well, we're not asking how should society be. So I would like a debate that's at a higher level, at the level of moral philosophy, first to establish what our ethos and our principles are, and then have a discussion about what the procedural elements should be. So I would prefer us to have conversation around citizenship, social justice, ethics of care, and so on. Work out, we think, the smart city, work out what smart city do we want to create, and then come up with the procedural elements to enable that to happen. So I think what we're doing at the minute is just starting at this very technical, practical intervention, as opposed to asking, I guess, a more difficult, bigger question about what kind of city do we want to create and live in.
Yeah.
So I think we should start at a bigger question. That would be where I would like to see things start. And I have a book out last year called The Right to the Smart City. And that's what that book is about. That book is about starting to ask those kind of normative kinds of questions.
Yeah. You know, some people may say that when you will use the electronic pay. They will record your GPS, like something like that. So I think it's a bit of problem for the smart city.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. So now different types of smart cities have come at this a different way, right? So the way in which smart cities are being implemented, for example, in China, is very different to how they're being implemented in Ireland. So things like social credit scoring, electronic pay, facial recognition cameras, that's a very different type of architecture to the type of architecture that I'm used to. We have a lot of people in Ireland will still use cash. I don't know anybody who pays with their phone. So I either pay with a piece of plastic or I pay with cash. I never paid for anything with my phone, ever. And I don't even know how I would do it in most shops. I don't think most shops would even know what to do with it, So it's just a very different. I think depending on where you are, and depending on what kind of architecture and what kind of political economy and governance regime is in behind that will make a big difference to what kinds of privacy implications and what you can do about that would differ. Now, if you're in a situation where that technology is in place, then it could be quite difficult to resist, right? And what are the ways in which people resist are moving towards things like lots of encryption and lots of evasion. Looking for ways to try and mask or subvert or hide or find alternative ways to do things. Now, to me, that's not good, because once that's in place and you'll start to do those things, then you're implicitly recognizing that there's a big problem. And then the question then is can you get any rollback? And the rollback is difficult, and that's what's going to be one of the issues around this coronavirus. Is when you use these technologies to start tracking people around the disease and the transmission of the disease and whether people are complying with social distancing, complying with quarantine, is once those technologies are in place, it will be quite difficult to roll them back. So that's always the issue. And so you'll find in a lot of the Western discourse at the minute on like newspapers and on social media and on tech magazines and so on, there's a lot of discussion about this going on at the minute. There's a lot of discussion about control creep. There's a lot of discussion about surveillance and privacy, and about trying to balance tackling the disease with erosion of civil liberties and civil rights. And how do you get the balance of those right? And how do you get the balance so that things will roll back afterwards? And that's going to be quite difficult to manage, I think.
Yes, I'm quite agree with you. Thank you, Professor Rock.
Yeah.
Hi, can I ask you a question? So what do you think about the role of smart cities in the pursuit of sustainable development? How can smart cities contribute to sustainable development goals?
Sorry, I can't hear you very well. Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Can smart cities contribute to sustainable development goals?
Smart city contribute to what? Sorry.
Sustainable development. Sustainability.
Sustainability.
Yeah. How can smart city contribute to sustainability?
Oh, okay. So there's a couple of arguments that people use for this. So one of the issues around sustainability is around efficiency and around doing things in a more kind of a manageable, less wasteful, more resourceful way. like one of the examples I used earlier was this notion of say you're emptying the bins in the city. At the minute, say I had 100 bins. At the minute, the truck will visit all 100 bins every day. Whereas if I have a sensor inside the bin and the truck only goes to those that are 80% full, it might only go to 40 bins a day. So I'm now no longer spending fuel on visiting those 60. So I'm saving fuel costs. So there's a kind of an environmental contribution in terms of reducing energy consumption, reducing fuel consumption, and kind of making things more efficient that way. There's all this stuff around kind of nudge and making people more energy conscious and so on, and more environmentally conscious around how they live their lives and so on. So a lot of it's been around, a lot of the sustainability stuff around smart city has been around that kind of reducing costs, improving efficiency, reducing costs. But there's also been things around actually monitoring the environment, so stuff around monitoring air quality, monitoring kind of management of the environment and so on, that again would kind of create a more sustainable kind of environment. So more, it's kind of partly linked in with notions of resilience, more resilient kinds of environments, by being able to be more timely and responsive to issues that might be developing there. So there's that. Sustainability is not really my area of interest, but I think that's where some of that work has been kind of looking at. It's about using the kind of intelligence, really. So using intelligence about the city to make better decisions and to more efficiently manage resources. That's kind of what their argument is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Anyone has other questions? If no, maybe we can. Do you have any other thing to tell us?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered a few different things there about publishing, and also back on the lecture. So I think that's fine.
Oh, okay. Maybe let's end here today.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. I hope that was of use. Okay.
Oh, thank you very much, Professor Rob. Let's end here today.
Okay,
It's a very
thank you.
valuable session. Thank you very much.
Yep. Okay, great. Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you.